So today I want to talk about something that almost nobody in mainstream media is connecting properly. And once you see it connected, you cannot unsee it. Here is what we know right now as of this week. The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire on April 8th. Oil prices dropped, stock markets surged, and within hours of that announcement, Iranian drones and missiles were hitting oil infrastructure in Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, and Saudi Arabia. Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz again, and Israel launched its largest strikes on Beirut since the war began, killing over 250 people in a single night. That is the ceasefire. That is what Washington is calling a success. But here is the deeper story, the one that explains why Iran, after 40 days of American and Israeli bombing, still has enough missiles to strike 17 countries simultaneously. The one that explains why half of Iran's missile launchers survived 5 weeks of the most intensive American airstrikes since the Gulf War. And the one that explains why American defense analysts are now openly warning that Iran holds the technical pieces for a missile capable of reaching the continental United States. That story leads directly to Pyongyang, and it has been building for over 40 years. Now, before I explain why this matters so much right now, I want to give you the framework I use for analysis, because I never want you to just accept what I say. I want you to see the logic and test it yourself. I look at 3 things. First, I look at structure, the deep forces that constrain what is possible. Geography, industrial capacity, supplier relationships. These do not change because a president gives a speech. Second, I look at incentives, what each actor actually wants, not what they say they want, because those 2 things are almost always different. Third, I look at operational history, not abstract history, but the documented record of what actually happened, what the UN reported, what the Treasury Department sanctioned, what the DIA confirmed. When you apply this framework to Iran and North Korea, you get an answer that Washington has been deliberately avoiding for 20 years. And now, in April 2026, that avoidance has consequences. So let me walk you through this step by step, because this is not complicated. It is actually very simple. And that simplicity is exactly what makes it so alarming. Let me start with where Iran's missiles actually come from, because this is the fact that disappeared from the coverage the moment the war started. According to Dr. Bruce Bechtel, a former Defense Intelligence Agency analyst and co-author of the book Rogue Allies, published in 2025, virtually all of Iran's ballistic missiles trace directly back to North Korea. Not inspired by North Korea, not partially derived from North Korea. Directly sourced from North Korea. The Jiang missile, the short-range weapon Iran has been firing at U.S. facilities and Gulf targets throughout this war, is a direct upgrade of the Scud. North Korea shipped approximately 200 of those to Iran starting in 1986, and then it built the factory inside Iran to produce more. Iranian crews still rely on North Korean engineers and components to keep that production line running today. The longer-range strikes, the missiles hitting Israel and American bases in the region, rely on what Bechtel calls the no-dong family. Pyongyang sold Iran roughly 150 of those in the late 1990s and built the production facility. The Ahmad and Ghadar missiles that have been striking Israel throughout this war are direct derivatives. The Khorramshahr, Iran's medium-range system capable of reaching 2,500 miles, is the Iranian version of the Musudan, the Hwasong-18, which North Korea sold to Iran in 2005. The entire architecture of Iran's offensive missile capability, every missile that has forced America to burn through billions of dollars in interceptors over the past 40 days, was built in Pyongyang and assembled in Tehran. Now here is where it gets important, because this is not just about the past. This is about what is happening right now and what it means for what comes next. In 2013, North Korea began helping Iran develop an 80-ton rocket booster, not a short-range missile, not a medium-range missile, an 80-ton rocket booster, the same thrust capacity as the engine that powers the Hwasong-18, North Korea's ICBM, confirmed by the UN panel of experts, confirmed by the US Treasury Department, which sanctioned both Iranian and North Korean companies for this specific cooperation in 2016, and the UN confirmed that shipments of critical parts were still continuing as recently as 2020. Let me be very precise about what that means. As of 2020, the last confirmed date, North Korea was still shipping components of intercontinental ballistic missile technology to Iran. And the Defense Intelligence Agency, in its most recent public assessment before this war began, stated that Iran could use its existing space launch vehicle program to develop a militarily viable ICBM by 2035, if it chose to pursue that capability. The key phrase is if it chose to pursue it, because everything we now know about what survived the bombing suggests that Iran has been making exactly that choice, quietly, underground, for over a decade. Now let me explain the structural fact that makes all of this so consequential. And this is the part that even the most detailed mainstream reporting has consistently missed. North Korea did not just send Iran missiles. It sent Iran the knowledge of how to hide them. Starting in the early 2000s, North Korea's mining entities began exporting underground tunnel construction technology to Iran. The same tunnel networks that allowed North Korea to survive decades of American military pressure. The same deep underground facilities that made it impossible to destroy North Korea's missile program from the air. North Korean engineers helped Iran build what analysts now call missile cities, entire underground complexes dispersed across Iranian territory, buried inside mountain ranges, specifically engineered to survive sustained bombing. And now, in April 2026, after 5 weeks of the most intensive American airstrikes since the Gulf War, we know exactly how well that investment paid off. A U.S. intelligence assessment confirmed by CNN, sourced to 3 separate officials familiar with the intelligence, found that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers are still intact. Thousands of one-way attack drones remain in Iran's arsenal. One source said of Iran, they are still very much poised to wreak absolute havoc throughout the entire region, after 5 weeks. After the most powerful military in human history struck those targets every single day, the Pentagon disputed the assessment, calling it completely wrong. But then it pointed to a reduction in the volume of launches, not to the destruction of the arsenal itself. That distinction is critical. A reduction in launches is not the same as a degraded capability. It may simply mean Iran is choosing to conserve what it has. Here is the structural reason for that survival, and it goes directly back to Pyongyang. Iran's missile launchers are mobile. The ones that have not been destroyed are constantly moving, shoot and move. Exactly the doctrine that North Korea developed and then transferred to Iran. Satellite sees a launcher, analyst identifies it, strike package is assembled. By the time the missile arrives, the launcher has moved. It is the oldest asymmetric survival strategy in modern warfare, and America, with all its satellites and targeting systems and $13 billion aircraft carriers, still has not solved it. And then there is the specific problem of the solid fuel missiles, because this is where the North Korea connection becomes most dangerous going forward. Iran's solid fuel missiles, the Sejil, the Khyber-Shekan, the Fateh-1, they provide almost no launch preparation window. A liquid fuel missile requires hours of fueling. During those hours, a satellite can detect the thermal signature. A targeting team can assemble a strike package. There is a window to act. A solid fuel missile has no such window. The fuel is already inside. You receive the order, you erect the launcher, you launch. Minutes, not hours. No detectable preparation. Here is the problem. An Israeli intelligence assessment found that the production capacity for solid fuel missiles was significantly damaged by strikes in October 2024, specifically the planetary mixers that produce solid propellant. That damage constrained Iran's ability to manufacture more solid fuel missiles at scale during the early phase of this war, but Iran had a pre-existing stockpile estimated at over 3,000 total missiles before the fighting began. And it had something else. It had North Korean engineers still working inside Iranian missile facilities when the war started in February. Think about what that means. North Korean technical personnel were present in Iran's missile infrastructure at the moment the war began. Bechtel confirmed that Pyongyang's technicians were rebuilding Iranian missile sites until the fighting started. The Korea Mining Development Company and Green Pine, both North Korean front entities, have representatives in Tehran operating to this day. Now let me give you the strategic picture that all of these structural facts are pointing toward. Iran's missile program is not what the Pentagon briefings describe. It is not a degraded, declining capability being systematically destroyed by precision strikes. It is a distributed, underground, partially North Korean staffed system that is built specifically to absorb that kind of campaign and keep functioning. The ceasefire agreed on April 8th did not resolve any of this. It suspended the strikes for 2 weeks. That is all. And Iran has used that window to immediately restart pressure across the Gulf, striking oil infrastructure in Kuwait and the UAE within hours of signing. Iranian state media confirmed the strikes. Iran simultaneously threatened to ask the Houthis to close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait again if Israel continued hitting Lebanon, which Israel did the same night. So what does the ceasefire actually tell us? It tells us several things, and none of them are what the White House press secretary called maximum leverage. First, Iran survived 40 days of American and Israeli bombing with enough operational military capacity to keep striking 17 countries simultaneously. Trump's original stated objectives were to destroy Iran's missile arsenal, annihilate its navy, destroy its proxy networks, and ensure Iran could never obtain a nuclear weapon. NPR reported on April 8th that as the ceasefire took effect, all of those objectives remain very much an open question. Second, Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire terms allow Iran and Oman to collect transit fees from passing ships. Before this war, Iran allowed ships to pass freely. After 40 days of the most powerful military campaign in a generation, Iran now has legitimized leverage over the most strategically critical waterway on Earth. An Atlantic Council analyst said explicitly that the ceasefire puts Tehran in a pretty powerful position. In some ways, it legitimizes Iran's control of the strait. Third, Iran's 10-point peace proposal, which Trump called a workable basis for negotiation, includes lifting all sanctions permanently, the withdrawal of all American military bases from the region, recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium, a war loss reconstruction fund paid by the United States and Israel, and a solution to all regional conflicts, including Lebanon and Palestine. These are not the demands of a country that has been militarily defeated. These are the demands of a country that believes time is on its side. And here is the question that nobody in Washington is willing to answer publicly. Why does Iran believe time is on its side? Why does a country that has been bombed every day for 5 weeks, whose supreme leader was assassinated on the first day of the war, whose nuclear facilities were struck, whose major cities have been hit, why does that country believe it is winning the negotiation? The answer runs directly back to Pyongyang. Iran's missile program cannot be destroyed from the air. It was designed with North Korean assistance specifically to survive that kind of campaign. The launchers move, the stockpiles are underground, the production knowledge is distributed across facilities that America has not fully mapped, and the supplier relationship that feeds that program, the relationship that provided the 80-ton rocket boosters, the solid fuel technology, the tunnel construction, the no-dong derivatives, that relationship is still intact. North Korea still needs Iran as a customer. Iran paid North Korea approximately $3 billion per year for missile technology before this war. That is a relationship that neither Pyongyang nor Tehran has any incentive to end. Now let me address the most important question, the one that the ceasefire does not answer and that the next 2 weeks of talks in Islamabad will not resolve. What happens when the 2-week pause ends? Here is the structural constraint that determines the answer. Iran's 10-point demands include things that no American president can accept before the November midterms. Withdrawing all military bases from the Gulf, lifting all sanctions, recognizing Iran's right to enrich uranium. Trump said there would be no enrichment. Those two positions are not just different, they are incompatible. One of them has to move. And based on everything we have studied about the structural incentives on both sides, the one with the greatest pressure to move is the one whose economy is bleeding. And the one whose economy is bleeding is not Iran. Oil prices dropped 13% the moment the ceasefire was announced. That tells you everything. America's economy needed this pause more than Iran's did. Iran has been under sanctions for 40 years. It knows how to operate under economic pressure. American consumers have been watching gas prices surge for 5 weeks, and they are angry, and that anger has a direct line to midterm election results. BCA Research's chief geopolitical strategist said publicly, Trump may temporarily accept Iran as a gatekeeper, but after the midterms, the national security establishment will start demanding a more permanent solution. Fighting will ignite later this year, if not later this month. So the ceasefire is not a solution. It is a pause before the next escalation. And when that next escalation comes, Iran will be drawing on the same supply chain it has always drawn on. The Scud derivatives from the 1986 shipments, the No-Dong family from the late 1990s, the Hwasong technology transferred across the subsequent decade, the 80-ton rocket booster components confirmed delivered as recently as 2020, the solid fuel knowledge that North Korean engineers were still installing when the war began in February. And now, right now, during this 2-week ceasefire window, what do you think is happening at North Korea's missile production facilities? What do you think Kim Jong-un's government, which earned approximately $3 billion a year from this relationship, is calculating about the next shipment? North Korea has approximately 11,000 troops currently deployed in Russia gaining combat experience. Russia is paying Pyongyang $20 billion annually for weapons. The Krink axis, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, has survived every American attempt to break it. The DNI's own threat assessment published in March 2026 confirmed that these 4 countries are likely to continue their selective cooperation with each other. Cooperation that began with 200 Scud-Cs in 1986. That grew into ballistic missile factories built inside Iran. That progressed to 80-ton ICBM boosters transferred while nuclear talks were ongoing. That continued through UN sanctions, Treasury sanctions, and 40 days of American bombing. This is not a weapons pipeline. It is an immune system. It adapts to every pressure America applies, and it keeps functioning. And it has just survived the most intensive test in its history. Here is my assessment of where this goes. And I want to be clear that this is analysis, not prophecy. The logic may be wrong, but the logic is this. Iran emerges from this ceasefire with 3 things it did not have before the war. First, legitimized control of the Strait of Hormuz as an economic weapon, ratified by the terms of the ceasefire itself. Second, demonstrated proof that its missile and drone architecture, the one built on 4 decades of North Korean technology, can survive the American bombing campaign that was supposed to destroy it. Third, a negotiating position that requires America to choose between accepting Iranian regional power or restarting a war it could not decisively win the first time. North Korea emerges from this ceasefire with something equally significant. It has watched the most powerful military in the world spend 5 weeks and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to destroy a missile program that Pyongyang built. And that program survived. Every defense ministry that is watching this, from Taipei to Warsaw to Seoul, is now asking the same question. If the American military cannot destroy the Iranian missile program in 5 weeks of sustained bombing, what does American deterrence actually mean? The 2-week pause will expire. The Islamabad talks will either produce a framework that collapses under domestic political pressure on both sides, or they will produce nothing at all. And then the same structural forces that produced this war will still be in place. American interceptor stockpiles that are already severely depleted, an Iranian missile program that survived the first round, a North Korean supply chain that has operated continuously for 40 years through every form of American pressure ever applied to it, a Strait of Hormuz that Iran now knows it can control, and a ceasefire that the Atlantic Council said has left Tehran in a more powerful position than before the war began. The missiles that are hitting American positions in this war are North Korean missiles. The tunnels that are hiding those missiles from American satellites were built with North Korean engineering. The doctrine of shoot, move, survive, wait that has allowed Iran to sustain this campaign for 40 days was learned from the one country on earth that has successfully defied American military pressure for 70 years. And during those 70 years, North Korea has never stopped updating Iran's capabilities as it updates its own. That is the pipeline. That is the immune system, and it is still running. This is not prophecy. This is structural analysis based on documented history, confirmed intelligence reports, and the operational reality unfolding right now in the Gulf. I may be wrong about what happens next, but the logic of 40 years of North Korean-Iranian military cooperation, the logic that built the program that survived 5 weeks of American bombs, that logic does not stop because a ceasefire was announced on Tuesday night. The next missile that forces a decision in this war will trace its lineage to Pyongyang, just like every missile before it.